It's the International Soccer Preview, and we are Soccerphiles Canada. Welcome to Series 28, looking at the groups and teams of the 2024 Copa America. This episode is looking at the players of Costa Rica. Here we go! Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and this is Series 28 on the players of the 2024 Copa America. This episode covers Costa Rica's players. We're doing this media cast in two parts. Part one here is a look at the candidates for the squad and their likelihood of making it. We examine the participation of players in games over the recent period and give a little biographical or career information on them. And we take a couple of other factors into account to categorize them into definite, likely, possible, and so on. Part two will come out when the squad lists are released and the final squad is selected. At that time, we'll go back over the list that we create here and see who made it and who didn't. And we'll also cover a couple of other things like injuries, surprise selections, and our guess at who the starters are going to be. So this episode will have three sections. In section one, we look at some general information on the team. In section two, that's the main part. We cover the candidates in each position. And in section three, we summarize and conclude and try to determine who are going to be the starters. So let's begin then with section one and some general information on the team. We begin with some retirements, and the complexity of Costa Rica begins right here because basically we're in a transition stage for Costa Rica, moving from some veterans who are perhaps a bit overdue to be retiring from the team, and then bringing in quite a lot of new candidates. So let's look at the players who have retired, or at least who have been off the squad long enough that we think they're retired or not going to be part of this cup. The first one, Celso Borges, and we can go into great detail here, but we'll try to keep it short. Borges has 163 caps and 27 goals for Costa Rica since 2008. He's currently 36 years old and has been part of Gold Cup tournaments since 2009, and therefore 3 World Cup appearances under his time. He was captain of the team for the 2023 Gold Cup and was a starter in all 4 games there. However, he has not appeared for the Costa Rican team after the Gold Cup. I don't think we have any official word on whether he's retired. I think I read one article that said he was, but I couldn't get confirmation on that, but we presume so. Next, we have Keylor Navas, goalkeeper. Again, very experienced since 2008 with Costa Rica and 114 caps for Navas. He's 37 years old. He is with Paris Saint-Germain in France since 2019. And again, part of the team since the 2009 Gold Cup. However, he hasn't participated in quite a few Gold Cups, especially recently. Just World Cups ever since the way back in 2011 was the last time he participated in a Gold Cup. So missed all the regional competitions, but was their starting keeper in all 3 World Cups under his time. He has actually appeared fairly recently. He started 3 games recently up until March of 2023. However, he did announce his retirement in May of 2023, May 23rd to be precise. So we know that he's not going to be part of this tournament. Keylor Navas then. Kendall Waston, 74 caps for the national team. He's 36 years old. On the team a little less than the 2 players we just talked about since 2013, but has been an important part of the team. I'm going to speed up a little bit here. Oscar Duarte, these are huge names for Costa Rica. 34 years old with 75 caps and 4 goals, and last appeared for the team in March of 2023. In the case of Kendall Waston, it was in the Gold Cup there in 2023 when he last appeared. None of those two have appeared since. Johan Venegas, 83 caps for him, and he is 36 years old. And again, all of these players part of previous cups. And last appeared actually in the 2022 World Cup, though he was on the preliminary roster for the 2023 Gold Cup there. But has been off the team for quite a while. So those are 5 big names. We also have several other candidates, not quite so big, but kind of experienced players with the team who haven't been called up since the Gold Cup, but we'll wait till part 2 to talk about them. Let's talk about club affiliations for the team. Well, we had, as I said, with Keylor Navas, Paris Saint-Germain. He's been with top teams. We don't really have that here. We'll focus on the younger players coming in rather than the outgoing players. And we don't see nearly the kind of club affiliations that we saw with some of the experienced players. So among the new players, we have Jayland Mitchell, who's with Feyenoord in the Netherlands, and Manfred Ugalde with Spartak Moscow in Russia. Those are probably the 2 biggest. Sorry, I just had to clear my throat there. About half of the players are playing in Costa Rica. Saprissa, probably the biggest club there, or Herediano, another big club. They tend to be with those big clubs, or else they may be playing outside, but still in the Americas. So we see several in the MLS playing in America, or Canada or Mexico. We have a couple of players in Mexico as well. If they do play for European teams, they tend to be smaller ones like Aris in Greece, Heart of Midlothian in Scotland, or Westerlo in Belgium, teams that the average person wouldn't really know. But gone are the days of Joel Campbell with Arsenal and Keylor Navas with Real Madrid. Okay, that's a look at their club affiliations and a kind of a hint of what's to come there. Young players. Let's look at their recent games as we continue section 1 here. So we're really only going to examine from the time of the 2023 Gold Cup. There are huge changes after that. And we don't really see much point in going into games before that. Some of the veterans were actually gone for that cup. Some of them remained until that cup but didn't appear after. And we do have a couple of veterans still with the team. But there are 4 games in the cup. We didn't count that in the kind of recent participation count that we'll talk about for each of the players, but we will include it when we talk about the formations below here and in section 2. Let's go over the games though. They played 4 games in the Gold Cup, once again eliminated in the quarterfinals, which is you know, the top 8, a bit disappointing for a team that aims to be the top 3 in the region. 4 games there, 2 September friendlies, and then in November and March, they played 3 games which acted as Copa America qualifiers. The first 2 of those games were actually quarterfinals of the 2023-24 Nations League, but they lost that one, so they had to go on to a further playoff in March to get to the Copa America. So we have 3 games to look at there. And then friendlies, we have recent friendlies. We have 1 in February and 1 in March. Those were under 3 different managers, which we'll talk about soon. And those are their recent games. So we'll really be focusing on the games after the Gold Cup to March 2024. And I might add actually that the February 2024 friendly was somewhat experimental. We did see some familiar faces there. We also saw some new players being brought in. We didn't put that in our count of the game. So we just really have 6 games, 6 significant games to judge the players who are going to make it to the cup, or as far as we know. So not a lot of evidence to go on. In terms of tournament participation, Costa Rica has made it actually to 5 of the last 6 World Cups. 2010 was the time that they didn't make it. So in the recent period, they've made it to all the World Cups. I have the wrong information here, but I'll just bluff my way through it here and say, well, they automatically qualify for most of the Gold Cup, so they haven't missed one of those. And the last 3 World Cups they've been part of. This is actually the 4th time we're doing Costa Rica. We've done them 3 times in the past, most recently for the 2022 World Cup, and we'll probably give a little less detail than we did on the players there. So particularly if you're looking for the career history of the experienced players who are on their way out, we recommend the 2022 World Cup mediacast, because we did go into greater detail there. Okay, the next section here is formations over the period, and this is actually not that significant. Maybe what's most significant is that it's kind of all over the place. So when we look, including the Gold Cup games on that February friendly, we have 11 games to look at, and we have no formation being used more than 3 times there. So the most common one is a 4-2-3-1. That's only used 3 times. Oops, got to get my graphics right here. 3 times, and then we have 3 formations being used twice and 2 formations being used once, and not much of a pattern. To make matters worse, that 4-2-3-1, all those games occurred under managers no longer in charge. So we're kind of looking for patterns to help you. The only one we can really point out here is that the new manager favors a 3-man central defense, because he has used it in 4 of his 5 games. So really not much to guide us in terms of formations, and we'll have to look at the June games to see if this takes any shape. Okay, and that is it, except for the last order of business, their upcoming games. So right away here we have the a friendly in Costa Rica. A lot of teams are playing their friendlies in the USA to get ready for the Copa America, which takes place there. But in Costa Rica's case, a friendly in on May 31st with Uruguay. They have that game. Otherwise, they can't schedule friendlies because they have World Cup qualifying beginning, early stages of CONCACAF World Cup qualifying. So on June 5th, they play St. Kitts and Nevis at home. And on June 8th, they play Grenada and they play Costa Rica away. I guess it is possible, because the tournament begins on June 20th, that they might schedule another friendly there, but the time is getting close. I'd be actually surprised if it happened at this point. So playing easy teams, well, some teams do decide on that for their warm-up, but basically they have 1 tough game there and 2 pretty easy games. But we're more interested in the lineups and seeing what the new coach, the new manager will do. That is the end of section 1. A look at the team. Now we move on to section 2, where I'll actually explain that manager situation, and we'll begin with the manager. We have a kind of outgoing manager, Luis Fernando Suarez. We won't go into biographical or career detail on him, but he was manager from 2021 to 23, as we'll see in the narrative for this section. And in November, he was replaced by Alfaro Gustavo. So November 2023. In between there actually was an interim manager, Again, we'll leave that till the narrative, but let's take a look at Alfaro Gustavo. So with Costa Rica since 2023. Prior to that, he was with Ecuador from 2020 to 2023. He took them through the 2021 Copa America and the 2022 World Cup, Ecuador. And otherwise, Gustavo has been manager of many teams in Argentina, some of the bigger ones, Boca Juniors there, and I won't go into detail, but it is a long list of Argentinian teams. He himself is from Argentina. He did play professionally for 4 years, but was never capped for the national team. So Alvaro Gustavo. Let's put it all together here with the summary of the position, as it were. In this case, it's a recent history of management of Costa Rica. So we'll begin with Luis Fernando Suarez, who was manager from 2021 to 23. Despite that being a fairly short time, he was in charge of them through 3 tournaments. That's the 2021 and 2023 Gold Cups. In each case, they were knocked out in the quarterfinals. And as I said in section 1, that's pretty disappointing, really. That puts them in the top 8. But Costa Rica is a team that hopes to see itself as the 3rd top team in the region. So the semifinals would be an appropriate finish for them. However, the quarterfinals is actually their standard finish. They finished there in 8 of the last 10 editions, so really kind of falling short in the Gold Cup. However, as we saw in the Gold Cup, they do prove to be one of the top 3 or 4 teams, because they've made it to the World Cup 4 out of the last 5 times, including the last 3 times. So Luis Fernando Suarez led them through qualification for the 2022 World Cup. And that looked like it wouldn't be, happen, because they were 5th or lower for most of the campaign. It was just a surge at the end that saw them finishing in 4th place, and then winning the Intercontinental playoff and reaching the Cup. And we're talking about players here, so I want to point out that their veterans were responsible for those successes, that late surge in World Cup qualifying, the win over New Zealand in the Intercontinental playoff, and even their goals in the World Cup were mostly scored by veterans. However, it's been increasingly clear over the past 3 years, the past several years, that these veterans were aging out and needed replacement. Luis Fernando Suarez didn't seem to be doing it, but the 2023 Gold Cup made that starkly clear, and perhaps part of the reason he was fired in July 2023 was because he wasn't undertaking that process of renewing the team. So July 2023, he was out. An interim manager replaced him until early November. That's when Gustavo was reinstated. He kind of had little choice but to lead them through the transition, because a lot of players seem to have quit the team perhaps after the Gold Cup. We're not sure if they quit or whether it was the manager's decision not to select them. But a lot of players, it seems, weren't available after the Gold Cup. So the new manager, Claudio Vivas, or the interim manager, had to begin the process. Claudio Vivas actually remains the sporting director of Costa Rica, but as the manager, they brought in Alfaro Gustavo in November. So we have basically Luis Fernando Suarez for the Gold Cup games, Claudio Vivas, the interim manager for the 2 September friendlies, and then Alfaro Gustavo taking over in November, and their 5 games from November onwards to March of 2024. All right, so there he is, our manager, Gustavo Alvaro, leading them through this Copa America. Let's go on to goalkeepers. And we begin with no definite candidates. In fact, for Costa Rica, because things are so uncertain right now, you're going to see very few definite candidates. These are at the likely level. It's Kevin Chamorro, and Patrick Sequeira. We have just one player at the possible level, Alexandra Lescano. And then in this and other categories, we're going to see all sorts of players at the possible but unlikely level or at the seemingly off the squad. In fact, we're leaving a lot of names off the list here that we have in the soccer files. Possible but unlikely, Joseph Delgado and Aaron Cruz. I should probably put Cruz ahead of Delgado there, but we won't worry about it. Next, we have Keylor Navas, as we saw, retired from the squad. And we have a whole list of names of players in the recent years have been involved, but now have been off the squad long enough that we consider them retired. So Lionel Moreira last played for the national team in June 2022. Esteban Alvarado last played in the 2022 World Cup, or at least last appeared there. And Kevin Briceno, anyway, off the team. I'll leave it at that. Let's go back and look at the candidates then who are more likely to make it to this cup. So Kevin Chamorro is 24 years old. He has 11 caps for Costa Rica since 2023, and he plays for Saprissa in Costa Rica his whole career in Costa Rica there. His only tournament was the 2023 Gold Cup, where he was the starter. Started and finished all the games there, but since then he has started only 2 of their 6 significant games. From now on, I'm just going to say 6 games because we didn't include that February kind of recruitment game. So Chamorro started 6 and was on the bench for 4 others, so we have him as a likely candidate here. Next, Patrick Sequeira is 25 years old. And he has 2 caps for the national team since 2018, for a long time, trying to get some games under the reign of Navas there. Sequeira plays for Ibiza in Spain. I think that's a 3rd division team there since 2023. He's played for some smaller teams in Spain, several actually, and he was the backup keeper in the 2021 Gold Cup and the 2022 World Cup. However, surprisingly not selected for the 2023 Gold Cup. However, he did return after a 6-month absence in September 2023. Didn't start any of the remaining 6 games, but was on the bench for all 6 of them. So looks to be a backup keeper in this tournament as well, behind Kevin Chamorro. Next, we have Alexander Lescano, the possible candidate. He is 22 years old, no caps for the national team though, and he plays for Herediano in Costa Rica. His whole career has been in Costa Rica, and he is he was a backup keeper for the 2023 Gold Cup, his first tournament there. Since that time, he has started none of their 6 games, but he was on the bench for 2 and not selected for 4 matches, including the last 2. So just a possible candidate here. They do have to bring 3 keepers, though. It'll be interesting to see who the 3rd will be if we presume that Chamorro and Sequeira will be the 2. They could be among these candidates, but we're only going to mention these ones by name because we have a lot of players to get through here, or maybe a name and one detail. Joseph Delgado was a backup keeper in the 2023 Gold Cup. Possible but unlikely means some recent involvement, but not very recent. So he's possible but unlikely. Aaron Cruz has been with the national team for a long time and hasn't made a tournament yet. He was on the preliminary squad for the 2017 Gold Cup, but hasn't made any of the 5 tournaments since then. But he is still around. Possible but unlikely means some recent participation. So he has an outside chance of being selected. And we've mentioned the 4 players off the team before: Keylor Navas, Lionel Moreira, Esteban Alvarado, and Kevin Briceno, all of those seemingly off the squad. Let's look at the summary of the position. So as we saw, Chamorro in all 4 games of the Gold Cup, that was under the old manager Suarez. Keylor Navas returned for the 2 September friendlies under the interim manager. And those two, Chamorro and Navas, shared duties under the new manager. It was Chamorro playing the November and February games, and Navas the 2 March games. Here. So Navas with some fairly recent involvement. However, he has announced his retirement since, so not a candidate here. So looking forward to the June games to see what the manager will do, and that'll be pretty much true for all of these positions. Let's move on to the defense and the central defense. I'll begin by just summarizing the position itself. So usually it's a 3-man central defense under the new manager. He used 3 central defenders in all 5 games except for the first one. Okay, and the candidates here are Francisco Calvo, so one of the relatively few players who have not basically retired from the squad. He's a definite candidate here. And next we have Julio Cascante as a likely candidate. Juan Pablo Vargas, also a likely candidate. We have Pablo Arboin as a possible candidate, and another possible candidate. We have 3 actually. Another one is Fernan Veron, and Alexis Gamboa. Possible but unlikely candidates. Again, we're just going to say that they've had some recent involvement, but don't look likely. And beyond that, we're just going to name them. So the very experienced Giancarlo Gonzalez, 90 caps for the national team. Okay, I'll stick to my thing of just naming them. Douglas Sequeira, no tournament experience for him or for Jason Molina. Jalen Mitchell, also possible but unlikely, despite a good club affiliation with Feyenoord in the Netherlands. And all of those players, as I say, have had some recent involvement. Less so is Kendall Waston. So now we're on the seemingly off the squad or retired. Kendall Waston last appeared in the 2023 Gold Cup, so did play in that tournament, but hasn't appeared since. And we have 3 other names that we're not going to put on the list. One of them is Oscar Duarte, also an experienced player. I actually will put him on the list because he last appeared in March of 2023, but probably one of the veterans who are no longer on the squad. I'm sorry I'm breaking my promises all over the place here by saying I'll just mention names and then not doing that. I am aware that I'm doing it. Anyway, let's look at the main candidates. Francisco Calvo. So he is, as I say, one of the veterans kind of left on the squad. He's 31 years old with 90 caps and 10 goals and plays for Juarez in Mexico since 2024. He was with Konyaspor in Turkey before that, and then 3 teams in the USA prior to that. He's been part of tournaments since the 2011 Copa America. I think he hasn't missed any tournaments, actually, and is a starter in most of them, including the 2023 Gold Cup most recently. And since then, he has started 5 of their 6 significant games from after the Gold Cup, and was on the bench for 1 other. So Francisco Calvo, kind of an important player now, given that he's will be one of the few experienced players with a lot of inexperienced players coming in. Next, we have Julio Cascante. He is one of those less experienced players, despite being 30 years old and with the national team since 2015. He only had 6 caps for the national team and 1 goal. And Cascante has never been part of any tournament. However, he was on the preliminary squad as far back as the 2017 Gold Cup there, but on the preliminary squad a few times, but never actually selected. He was on the preliminary squads of those teams without actually appearing for the national team. So he returned after a 7.5-year absence in September of 2023 and started 5 of their remaining 6 games and was on the bench for the other. So finally getting his chances. The only appearances he made were being named to preliminary squads. So Julio Cascante, now a likely candidate for this tournament, kind of finally getting his chance. The other likely candidate is Juan Pablo Vargas. He's 28 years old with 21 caps and 3 goals since 2017, and he plays for Millonarios in Colombia since 2021. That's actually no, not his second stint with them. He was on loan to them for a while. Vargas has been part of the tournament since the 2017 Gold Cup, but he missed several tournaments after that, returning for the World Cup in 2022, where he was a substitute, and the 2023 Gold Cup, where he was a starter. Juan Pablo Vargas, though, has only started 1 of their 6 games since the Cup. He was subbed in for 1, though, and on the bench for 2. And ultimately, only once was he not selected, not called up. So we have him as a likely candidate here. Let's move on to the possible candidates. First is Pablo Arboin, 26 years old with 9 caps for Costa Rica since 2019. And he plays for Saprissa in Costa Rica. He was a substitute in the 2023 Gold Cup there and has since started 2 of their 6 games. Was on the bench for 1 and not selected for 3 others. So Pablo Arboin, a possible candidate. Next, Fernan Ferron is 24 years old, just 2 caps for the national team because his first one was in 2024, so new to the national team. He also plays in Costa Rica. He actually was on the preliminary squad for the 2021 Gold Cup, so quite a few years ago, and was kind of off the team for a few years after that. He returned for that recruitment friendly in February 2024. We're going to see a few players coming out of that game. He started 2 of their 3 remaining games then and was on the bench for the other. So Fernan Ferron, one of the players emerging from that February recruitment game. Alexis Gamboa is our third possible candidate. He's 25 years old with 3 caps for Costa Rica since 2023. And he was just on the preliminary squad for the 2023 Gold Cup, but not selected. And his first appearance was actually after that in September of 2023. He didn't start any of their 6 games, but he was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 2. He also played in that recruitment friendly in February of 2024. So Alexis Gamboa, the third of the possible candidates. Again, the 4 possible but unlikely players: Giancarlo Gonzalez, Douglas Sequeira, Jason Molina, and Jayland Mitchell. And they're 2 veterans off the squad, Kendall Waston and Oscar Duarte. We'll give more details on any of those who make it to the final squad in part 2 if they do make it. Let's look at a summary of this position then. So we have usually a 3-man defense. There was a 3-man defense also in the first 2 games of the Gold Cup. It was Juan Pablo Vargas in the center, Kendall Waston on the right, and Francisco Calvo on the left. And actually, it didn't change much when they changed to a 2-man central defense. It was Vargas and Waston as the pairing, and Calvo playing as a left back instead of the left side of a 3-man defense. Going forward, though, Calvo and Cascante with a pairing in the September friendlies under the interim manager. And Calvo and Cascante have basically become the foundation under the new manager too. But many players were tried out because it was mainly a three-man central defense. So it was kind of Cascante and Calvo and someone else to simplify it. But the only players used more than once were Gonzalez in the November games. He's now a possible but unlikely candidate, not having played since. Airboyne and Ferron, each of those were used in 2 games. So quite confusing here. And I recommend leaving this section with the impression that Calvo and Cascante are the main candidates. Ooh, very complex, and it doesn't get any simpler as we go forward. The left back is just one position, but we have quite a few names on the list for just one position. Let's talk about the position of left back first. Usually it is a left back position, because even though the new manager uses 3 central defenders, he often has 5 at the back. So 3 central defenders with a left back and a right back. In one case, though, it's a 3-4-1-2 formation. So the left back and right back push up to become left winger and right winger. We're going to actually see that on the left side, it's a more attacking player playing in that winger role, whereas on the right side, it's the left or it's the right back pushing up into that role. Let's look at the candidates for left backs. We have no definite or likely candidates, so that suggests a bit of chaos here. We have Joseph Mora as a possible candidate, and then Ronald Matarrita as a possible but unlikely candidate. Brian Oviedo, also possible but unlikely, and Ian Lawrence, also possible but unlikely. And then seemingly off the squad, no, we won't include that name because he's too far off the squad. Let's go back and look at the candidates that we do have. Joseph Mora is 31 years old. And has been with Costa Rica since 2018 with 6 caps and no goals. He has not made it to a tournament despite being around since 2018. He was off the team for a while, though. He returned after more than 2.5-year absence in March of 2024, Joseph Mora, to start one of their 2 remaining games and was subbed in for the other. So actually kind of a new candidate in many respects, Joseph Mora. Next, we won't go into too much detail on the possible but unlikely candidates. We have Ronald Matarrita, a very experienced player, having appeared in many tournaments, though not all, since the 2016 Copa America Centenario. He has 56 caps for the national team and some recent involvement, but only enough for us to put him as a possible but unlikely candidate. Brian Oviedo, also kind of a veteran with the team, has been involved in many tournaments, not the 2023 Gold Cup, though, nor was Ronald Matarrita, by the way. Brian Oviedo has 81 caps for the national team. But again, possible but unlikely. So that means both of those players have appeared briefly since the 2023 Gold Cup, but are unlikely candidates. Even less likely, probably Ian Lawrence, who has never participated in a tournament but has some recent involvement. So again, we'll detail those players more in part 2 if they make it to the Cup. But really just the one possible candidate here. I'll bet you're waiting for the summary of the position to see who actually played, especially since Mora just showed up recently. And here's my summary. It's really just a mess of players ever since the Gold Cup. and no player has occupied the role more than twice. We did see Francisco Calvo, moving from central defence to left back in 2 of the 4 games of the Gold Cup. It was Matarrita in the 2 September friendlies under the interim manager there, and left midfielder Valverde twice towards the end. I think we've moved Valverde to right back. Anyway, playing out of position here a couple of times. Otherwise, it's been players in single appearances, many of them playing out of position. And among those single appearances are Joseph Mora and Brian Oviedo here. Okay, that's the left back position. So again, dying to see what's going to happen in the warm-up games in June and the World Cup qualifying games. Let's move over to the right back. And here we have more viable candidates. The first one is Haxal Quiros as a likely candidate, and also likely the player we just mentioned, Jeffrey Valverde, coded as a left midfielder, but actually has been playing primarily as a right back here, sometimes moving up to midfield. Jeffrey Valverde. The possible candidate here, Gerald Taylor. Possible but unlikely, Yael Lopez. And players who are off the squad that we do want to mention are Carlos Martinez, and Keisher Fuller. So I will wait until the end of the section to go over those. We also have 2 that we're not even putting on the list. So that's a lot of candidates for just one position. Let's take a closer look at them. Haxal Quiros is 25 years old, but got his first cap in 2023, has 4 caps for the national team. He plays for Herediano in Costa Rica. He got his first appearance in September 2023 and started 1 of their remaining 6 significant games there. He subbed in for 2 and was on the bench for 2. So just 1 match that Quiros was not selected for. So we have him as a likely candidate. Next is Jeffrey Valverde, again coded as a left midfielder, but we've moved him over here since that's where he's played recently. He is 28 years old, Jeffrey Valverde, with 12 caps for the national team since 2022. And he plays for Saprissa in Costa Rica. His whole career has been in Costa Rica. He was a starter in the 2023 Gold Cup, lined up as a right winger and a right back, as we will see. And he has since, Valverde, started 4 of their 6 games since the Cup. And he was injured for the last 2 matches, but he has recovered from that injury. So one of the more possible candidates here, I would say, Jeffrey Valverde. Let's look at the possible candidate, Gerald Taylor. He is 23 years old, just 1 cap since his first in 2023, and plays for Saprissa in Costa Rica. He was actually off the team for a year. He had been on the preliminary squad for the 2023 Gold Cup, but wasn't selected. He hadn't played for a year until he returned in March 2024, and then Taylor started 1 of their 2 remaining games and was on the bench for the other. So quite possible, Gerald Taylor. Next, we have Yael Lopez, just possible but unlikely. He appeared in the 2021 Gold Cup, but not in the 2 tournaments afterwards, and has only 2 caps for the national team, but does have recent participation that puts him as an outside candidate here. Carlos Martinez, the first of our seemingly off-the-squad players, was a part of the 2022 World Cup and 2023 Gold Cups squads, but has not appeared since the 2023 Gold Cup. So again, one of many players with some experience who seem to be off the team. And that's actually kind of an interesting detail, because some of them are not old. He is 25 years old, Carlos Martinez, but we're going to see some players kind of in his class who are young enough to be on the team, who have not appeared since the Gold Cup or over the past year or so. Keisha Fuller is also seemingly off the squad. He's not that old either. 29 caps and 37 goals, involved in all tournaments since the 2019 Gold Cup, but has not appeared since the 2023 Gold Cup. So we're not just talking about retirements here, but a total revamping of the team. If it's players like Keisha Fuller and Carlos Martinez who are not appearing. Anyway, let's go back to the summary of this right back position then. So as we saw, it was Valverde in all Gold Cup games, whether as a right winger or right defender. And he played both games under the interim manager as well. And he played one game as right winger under the new manager. And we also saw him start twice on the left under the new manager. So as I said, one of the players who does seem more firmly embedded in the team than most of the players we're looking at. Otherwise, though, it was players in single appearances under the new manager until Quiros had the position, and he played it in the last two friendlies. That was the recruitment friendly in February and the last friendly in March. So Quiros with a bid there. But keeping in mind that Valverde was injured for the last two games, I would say Valverde is probably the top candidate right now. Okay, that is it for defense. Let's move on to midfielders and begin with a summary of the position itself. So in the formations Costa Rica has used, it's usually a two-man position. The new manager had one friendly with a 5-3-2 formation, so we did see three midfielders used in that case. Okay, let's look at the candidates. So for defensive midfielders, we have no definite candidates, but a likely candidate in Alejandro Bran, and then a possible candidate in Orlando Gallo. Also possible is Jefferson Brenes. And we have a possible but unlikely candidate, Houston Salas. Maybe I'll deal with them as we go here. So Houston Salas has been was selected for the World Cup squad, but not the 2023 Gold Cup squad. He has appeared after, but only enough to make us consider him possible, but unlikely. The other candidate, Sebastian Acuna, is a new candidate who has kind of popped up, but again, unlikely to make it. That is Sebastian Acuna. And then the player that is seemingly off the squad, Ricardo Peña. He's only 18 years old. So again, we're not talking about veterans here. Peña was selected for the Gold Cup in 2023, actually a starter in game one, but lost his starting position and hasn't been called up since the Gold Cup. So I wonder what's going to become of some of these players who a year ago seemed promising for Costa Rica. Peña is one of them. But let's go back and look at the main candidates here. So Alejandro Bran is 23 years old. He has 6 caps for Costa Rica since 2021, and he plays for Herediano in Costa Rica. He was loaned, though, to Minnesota United, probably that B team there, since 2024. And he was not part of any tournaments despite being on the squad since 2021. In fact, he was off the team for 3 years and returned in September 2024 to start 3 of their remaining 6 games, as well as subbing in for 1 and being on the bench for 2 others. So his recent selection consistently makes us put him as a likely candidate. Next, we have Orlando Gallo as a possible candidate. He's 23 years old, also with the team since 2021, but not part of any tournaments there. Orlando Gallo has 13 caps and 1 goal for Costa Rica. Actually, for the last 2 tournaments, he has been under a doping ban. That was a 2-year doping ban from, I believe it was September, maybe October 2020 or perhaps October 2021. I thought it was 2 years. Yes, it was 2 years. He was eligible to return in November, but actually just returned in March of 2023, but started both of their games there, Orlando Gallo, and had actually played in the recruitment friendly in February 2024. So in terms of recent participation, he may be a little bit higher than the possible level we put him at. Jefferson Brenes is the other possible candidate. He's 27 years old with 10 caps and 1 goal for Costa Rica since 2020. Unlike the others, he has participated in tournaments, but only the 2021 Gold Cup, where he was a sub and not selected for the 2 tournaments after that, and was actually off the team. So returned after a 2.5 year absence in March 2024, Jefferson Brenes, to start one of their remaining 2 games and subbed into the other. And he too had actually been selected for the recruitment friendly in February 2024. So again, those players, good recent participation, Orlando Gallo and Jefferson Brenes. And I think if they show up in the warm-up games in June, that they'll be likely candidates. Okay, and we have dealt with the 2 possible but unlikely, Houston Salas and Sebastian Acuna, and then Ricardo Pena seemingly off the squad. Let's, no, we won't summarize the position yet, because some of the central midfielders will show up. So let's look at the candidates who are coded as central midfielder. Well, actually, our first candidate, the likely candidate, Brandon Aguilera, is not coded as a central midfielder. He's coded as an attacking midfielder, but he played central midfield during this period, so we have him here. He is our only candidate. He's likely the only candidate in the top 3 categories there. The next is the possible but unlikely Yeltsin Tejada, who is not off the team, has had recent participation. I might as well deal with him now. A real veteran for the team, and not initially selected for the Gold Cup in 2023, but he was called in after the group stage there, and did play after the 2023 Gold Cup, but only enough for us to put him as possible but unlikely. So probably in one of the early games, but not recent games. Yeltsin Tejada, possible but unlikely. And then we have some veterans off the team. Celso Borges, last appeared for the team in 2023. In the 2023 Gold Cup. We think he's retired now. And Wilmer Azo Fifa, also part of the Gold Cup squad, but not appearing since the Gold Cup there. Azo Fifa, only 29 years old, so young enough to come back. And then we have 2 candidates we're not going to put on the list even. Now, let's go back and look at these candidates, really just Brandon Aguilera. He is 20 years old, but has 13 caps for the national team since 2022, and plays for Nottingham Forest in England since 2022, or is at least on their roster. He's actually was on loan to Bristol Rovers in England since 2024, and he's played in Portugal as well. He was selected, Brandon Aguilera, for the World Cup 2022 squad. He subbed into a couple of games there, but surprisingly not selected for the Gold Cup in 2023, just on the preliminary squad there, didn't make the final cut. But Aguilera has started 3 of their 6 games since, and he subbed in for 1 and was on the bench for 2 others. So consistently selected since the Gold Cup. Brandon Aguilera, a likely candidate here. Yeltsin Tejada, I'm tempted to go into some detail because he's such a veteran. He's 78 years old, only 31 years old, so there is a chance age-wise of him being used, but possible but unlikely there. Okay, now we can summarize the position. So again, usually a two-man position here. In the Gold Cup, it was Borges, Celso Borges, in all four games, but he had three different partners over the four games. Only Azofeifa was used twice. However, both of those have not been called up since. It was Bran and Acuna in both of the September friendlies under the interim manager. And it was Bran, Gallo, and Aguilera, the only ones to appear more than once after that. So here too, we get a raft of players in single appearances, making it difficult for us to know to predict who's going to be used in the cup. However, I will say that in general, we favor Bran and Gallo because Bran was used the most and Orlando Gallo was used in the last three games. So if we have to make a prediction, we would nominate Bran and Gallo as the top candidates here. Okay, let's go on to the left and right midfield. And actually, we'll talk about the position here. Only one time did the formation actually afford this position of left midfielder and right midfielder. Usually it's a 4-3-3. For Costa Rica, it was a 5-3-1. A 5-3-2 formation where we saw this position. And that was the recruitment game under the new manager in February. So basically, any players that we nominate here have not played enough recently for us to move elsewhere. If they have, then we've moved them to the position that they played in. So, for example, we have Jeffrey Valverde. He's coded as a left midfielder, but we moved him to where he's been playing at right back or right winger. We have Alvaro Zamora. But we've moved him up to the left attacking position because that's where he's been playing. And so that leaves us with Ariel Lassiter. He is a possible candidate. Actually, the only time they used the formation requiring a left midfielder, he was the one. That's his only start, though. We have Randall Leal also as a possible candidate. And that's it. We have couple of players, including Johan Venegas, who we won't put on the list because they've been gone too long. And let's look at these two candidates. Maybe they will show up in other positions, or if this formation is used. Ariel Lassiter is 30 years old, and he has 19 caps and 1 goal for Costa Rica since 2019. So joined the team a bit late there, around 25 years old. Lassiter plays for Montreal in Canada since 2023, and basically has been in the MLS for quite a long time, playing for Houston Dynamo, LA Galaxy, and so on. He was part of the 2021 Gold Cup squad, but not in any tournament after that. He returned after a 2.5-year absence, Ariel Lassiter, in March of 2024. So we're seeing quite a few players pop up right at the end here. Lassiter is one of them. He started one of their remaining 2 games, the last one, and he was on the bench for one other. So Ariel Lassiter making a late bid onto the team here. Randall Leal is actually an injury concern, and he's kind of been in and out of the team quite a bit since 2017. His first appearance for Costa Rica was on the preliminary squad for that tournament. His first cap was in 2018, though, the following year. And Randall Leal has 28 caps and 1 goal for the national team, only ultimately selected for one tournament. That was the 2019 Gold Cup. But he has been around before and after, most recently returning after a 2-year absence in September 2023 to start one of their remaining 6 games. But he was injured for the last 2 and not selected for 2 others. And that injury still troubling him. He is out with a tendon tear Well, a bit of an odd situation here. Out with a tendon tear from February to early April. That's what caused him to miss the March 2024 games. On April 21st, Lille came back and played 5 minutes for his club. And then he was out with a hip injury since and an unknown return date. So the poor fellow overcoming that tendon tear and immediately getting a hip injury. So we don't think he is going to be a candidate for the squad for several reasons, including that injury. Okay, that is the left midfielders. On the right, we have only one candidate at the at the seemingly off the squad level, so we won't spend too much time on Suhanda Zuniga. He was a starter playing the first two games of the Gold Cup in 2023. That was his first tournament. But he lost his starting position in that tournament and hasn't appeared since. So Suhanda Zuniga not looking like much of a possible candidate. Again, here we have three other candidates who are seemingly off the squad that we're not going to mention unless they appear on the final squad. Then we'll kind of bring them back into the narrative. Meanwhile, we're going to move on upfield to the attacking midfield position, and the position that we've kind of created to organize things, the left attacker position. So basically this could be a winger, it could be an attacking midfielder, could be a left or right forward. However, for Costa Rica, it's not, because they never use formation in that position. Sometimes, though, for Costa Rica, it can be a two-man position. So with that three-man defense, central defense, we sometimes see the left back and right back pushed up to left winger and right winger. And in something like a 3-2-2-2-1 formation, we can have a winger and an attacking midfielder. That happens a couple of times here for Costa Rica. So sometimes it's a two-man position, but most of the time it's just one of those positions, either a winger or an attacking midfield role. Okay, let's look at the candidates for left attacker. And we have Alvaro Zamora as a possible candidate. I mentioned him because he's coded as a left midfielder, but we moved him up to here because this is where he has played. We also have Jewison Bennett as the first of two possible candidates. Jewison Bennett and Josimar Alcocer as a possible candidate as well. And then we have Christopher Nunez, coded as an attacking midfielder, but here, however, he is seemingly off the squad. So I'll deal with him quickly here. Again, just 26 years old, so not a veteran who hasn't who's seemingly off the squad. Nunez was part of the Gold Cup 2023 squad. In fact, after subbing into game one, he became a starter in that tournament. But he hasn't been selected for the last four matches, Christopher Nunez. So maybe we should put him as a possible, but unlikely. But for some reason, we have him seemingly off the squad, which is quite harsh of us. Let's go back and look at the more likely candidates or more recent candidates. Alvaro Zamora. He's likely, in our opinion. He's 22 years old with 8 caps for the national team since 2022. He plays for Aris Thessalonica in Greece since 2023 and was with several teams in Costa Rica prior to that. He was part of their World Cup selection, but not part of the 2023 Gold Cup squad, just the preliminary squad there. And Zamora returned after an 11-month absence in November 2023, but started 2 of their remaining 4 games and subbed in for the 2 others. So we think Zamora is a likely candidate at this point. Jewison Bennett, just 19 years old, but it's actually a fairly familiar name to me. because he's been on the squad since 2021 and has 15 caps and 2 goals. Jewison Bennett plays for Sunderland in England, or is at least on their roster. Looks like he joined Alvaro Zamora at Aris Thessalonica on loan to Greece, in Greece on loan since 2024. That's kind of interesting. He too was part of the World Cup squad. He actually started game one, Jewison Bennett, didn't keep that starting position though. And it was an injury that kept him out of the 2023 Gold Cup. He returned from that 6-month injury absence in September 2023 and started one of their remaining 4 games. Started one of their remaining 6 games there, subbed in for 3, but not selected for the last 2 matches, Jewison Bennett. So we have him as just a possible candidate, although he, and there's a kind of a class of players like him, looked very promising a year ago and less so now. I'm kind of thinking of Chacon. I think he's a defensive midfielder who we didn't mention, that looked very promising for the team about a year ago. Yes, and now we didn't even bother listing him based on his recent participation. So massive changes underfoot at Costa Rica here. The other possible candidate is Josimar Alcocha, and he is 19 years old with 8 caps for the national team since 2023, plays for Westerlo in Belgium and was with Alajuelense in Costa Rica. I forgot to mention that name in section 1 because that may be the biggest squad of all. Alajuelense. Josimar Alcocha was selected for the Gold Cup in 2023, started all 4 games there. However, over the recent period, he's only started the last of their 6 games in March there and wasn't selected after the Gold Cup until the last game. So again, we're not just talking older players, we're talking about all sorts of changes. And actually, I am going to move him to right wing. He's actually coded as a right winger, but for the first part of the discussion here, he played as a left-sided player. Under the new manager, though, his only appearance was on the right, and so I'm going to move him, even as we speak, I'm going to move him over to the right side, because under the new manager, that seems to be where he's going to be. Okay, so that leaves us the summary of the position of left attacker. It was Zuniga, who's now off the team, playing as a left winger in the first game of the Cup. And Alcocha played 3 games, the following 3 games as the left attacking midfielder. We also have Christopher Nunez playing each position once. So once as a left winger, once as a left attacking midfielder. After that, it's a positive mess with 5 different players used in the 7 games. And in one of those games, this position was not used. Only Zamora among those 5 players appeared twice. So very mixed up on the left side here. And we'll need to look at the June games to see if we can get any definition to this position. Let's go over to the right attacking midfielder side. And just one comment on the position here. Mostly it's the same as what we saw on the left. But on the right side, as opposed to the left, the right back does push up to the right winger position. On the left side, we saw an attacking player coming in when it was a winger position. But on the right side, it's played by the same players. And so for the most part, this right side is a right attacking midfielder role. And the first candidate here is Joel Campbell. Joel Campbell kind of plays all over the field a little bit. So we're going to see him in more positions than just this one, but primarily he's been here. We've already moved Josimar Alcocha over here because under the new manager, he plays as a right winger just in the last game there. We also have Jimmy Marin as a possible but unlikely player, and Carlos Mora also possible but unlikely. And the players seemingly off the squad or retire. We have one, but we've left him off the list here. Let's go back and look. So Joel Campbell, one of the veterans who remains, I'd say he and Francisco Calvo, kind of the leaders of the team now. Joel Campbell has 31 caps. Sorry, he does not. He's 31 years old and has 136 caps and 27 goals for Costa Rica since 2011. He's actually back with Alajuelense in Costa Rica, his second stint with them, but he played in Mexico, Leon in Mexico, for a couple of years before that, and has been associated with some big teams like Arsenal in England, Villarreal in Spain, and Olympiacos in Greece. So a fairly impressive resume for Joel Campbell. In terms of tournaments as well, he has an impressive list of tournaments since the 2011 Gold Cup. He missed the 2013 edition, but otherwise has been part of it all. And always as a starter, especially, always as a starter, even in the two World Cups there. And no, not in the 2018. He was struggling with injury there, but in the World Cup and in the recent Gold Cup there. So we saw some veterans missing that tournament, but he has been there all along and since. So Joel Campbell has started 3 of the 6 games since the 2023 Gold Cup. That was the first 3 games. Maybe he's drifting off because he subbed in for the last, or he subbed in for 2 and was on the bench for the last one. I don't know if that means he is drifting off, but we don't know really what to expect for Costa Rica. Anyway, we have Joel Campbell as a likely candidate. Josemar Alcocha, we introduced on the left side and then moved him over to the right, so we won't introduce him again. Just remind you that he started the last of their games, but not selected for the first 5 since the Gold Cup. Jimmy Marin is possible but unlikely. That means he has some recent involvement, despite not being selected for the last 2 tournaments. Kind of made a bit of a comeback here, but I think it was the first game after the Gold Cup that he started. Just a possible but unlikely candidate here. Same with Carlos Mora. He actually was selected for the Gold Cup in 2023 and has made an appearance since, but only enough for us to put him at the possible but unlikely level. So Jimmy Marin, Carlos Mora, possible but unlikely. Let's look at the position then. When it's a right winger, we've seen Valverde, who's been playing as a right back, moving up into the right winger position. Valverde, one of the more consistent players in this very chaotic period for Costa Rica. Joel Campbell played the position in 3 of the 4 games in the Gold Cup, and Carlos Mora the other time. In the September friendlies under the interim manager, it was Jimmy Marin. So actually 2 games for him there, but off the squad, I think, since September. And under the new manager from November, 4 different players were used. That was Campbell, Valverde, Alcocha, all familiar names, and Madrigal, who we're going to meet a bit later, also used. And then in the 5th game, the position was not used at all, or in one of the games, the position was not used at all. So quite chaotic on the side, but at least we're seeing familiar names filling the position for the most part here. And our last midfield position is the central attacking midfield. And actually this position has been used a little bit. It was used twice in the Gold Cup and twice after. The new manager has only used a formation that has this position once. So really we're not going to see any top candidates here. In fact, our first one is at the possible level. Well, I should say Brandon Aguilera, who we moved to central midfield, is coded as an attacking midfielder, but we've dealt with him already. Elias Aguilera is a possible candidate, and is actually the only one over here. Well, no, I'll talk about that. That's not true. Christopher Nunez, also coded as an attacking midfielder, is we moved him to the left attacking and have dealt with him. Here we actually have four candidates who we weren't planning to mention, but I will mention just two by name: Aaron Suarez and Diego Campos, both of them selected for the 2023 Gold Cup, but not appearing since. I think actually Aaron Suarez did appear in the recruitment friendly, but not otherwise. Diego Campos not appearing at all. Okay, so really, after all that, we only have one candidate to talk about as a central attacker. That's Elias Aguilar, and he's 32 years old with 22 caps and 2 goals for Costa Rica since 2015. And he's in his third stint with Herediano in Costa Rica since 2023. He came back from Incheon United in Korea, in South Korea. That was his third stint with there. So he was over there in Asia for quite a while, pretty involved, mostly with Incheon United, but playing on the island of Jeju in South Korea as well. And also played for a team in Mexico. Aguilera has been part of tournament, or was part of the 2015 Gold Cup as a substitute, and then not selected for the following 3 tournaments after that, but selected for the 2019 Gold Cup where he was a starter, and not for the 2021 or 23 Gold Cup. So really in and out of the team is Elias Aguilar. And in this case, he returned after a 4-year absence in November of 2023 and started one game, subbed in for one, and was on the bench for 2 others. So wow, we're getting all sorts of players. This one, Aguilar, kind of plucked out of the Where Are They Now files for Costa Rica. And let's summarize the positions. So as I said, the position was used 4 times, and 4 different players each time it was used. Under the new manager, though, it was Aguilar coming in to play the only time the position was used. So holy smokes. Actually, it took me ages to simplify these things enough to kind of weed through and boil them down to a simple summary in a lot of cases. Okay, we move on to the forward line. We have no secondary strikers to present. And among the forwards, we once again don't have any definite candidates. We just have the likely level. First of all, I'll mention that Joel Campbell, on some sources, is coded as a forward. We've treated him as a right attacker. By the way, Campbell was one of those 4 players who played as a central attacking midfielder. We're going to see him as a forward as well, but primarily as a right attacker. So our first candidate here is Manfred Ugalde. As a likely candidate, also Anthony Contreras, likely candidate, and Kenneth Vargas, a likely candidate. We have Warren Madrigal. We saw him play once as a right attacker, but he's coded as a forward, and he is here as a possible candidate. And then, yes, 3 players seemingly off the squad who we won't mention here, and we'll bring them back in if they are selected. I should have talked about the position itself, so I'll do that quickly here. Usually the forward position is a single position for Costa Rica, but we do have 3 games where it was a 2-man position. I just want to see if any of those were under the new manager. Under the new manager, the only time we have one November game where there's a double forward, and the only other time is that February recruitment game, which we've largely been ignoring here. So a couple of times a two-man position, but usually a one-man position. Okay, let's talk about the candidates. Manfred Ugalde, 22 years old, with 8 caps and 2 goals for Costa Rica since 2020. Probably the best club affiliation among the active players on the squad here. Ugalde is with Spartak Moscow in Russia since 2024. He was with Twente in the Netherlands prior to that. And he was the 2019 CONCACAF Best Young Player award winner there in 2019. However, was never selected for any of the squads since his first cap in 2022. Was actually off the team for a while. He returned after a 2-year absence in September 2023, Manfred Ugalde, and he started all 6 of their remaining games. So again, strange goings on here with Costa Rica. He looks like a likely candidate, though. The reason we don't have him as definite is just we just don't know what changes are going to be made. The whole situation is a bit too unpredictable. But with 6 starts in a row, he's looking quite promising, Manfred Ugalde. Next, we have Anthony Contreras. He is 24 years old, 28 caps and 4 goals for Costa Rica since 2021. And he plays for Riga in Latvia, has been loaned to Paphos in Cyprus since 2024. Interesting clubs, those. He was in Costa Rica, though, before that. And he was selected for the 2022 World Cup and the 2023 Gold Cup. He was a starter in the Gold Cup. However, since then has only started 1 of their 6 games. But he has subbed in for 5 games. So Anthony Contreras, a likely candidate. Kenneth Vargas, is just 22 years old with 4 caps for the national team since 2023. He plays in Scotland for Heart of Midlothian there, and in Costa Rica before that. That's just since 2024. He was on loan since 2023, I guess, but just a recent one. Move abroad there for Kenneth Vargas. He was selected for the Gold Cup. Actually, he wasn't selected. He was cut from the preliminary squad, but he was brought in after the group stage to replace a player, Kenneth Vargas. And over the recent period, that's from the 2023 Gold Cup, Vargas has started none of their 6 games, but he was subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 2 others. So we have him as a likely candidate, though almost certainly a substitute. Kenneth Vargas. Finally, we have Warren Madrigal. He's just 19 years old, 9 caps and 1 goal for the national team since 2023, and was part of the Gold Cup squad there, subbing into all 4 games there. He was also subbed out of one, which is a bit ignominious, I should say. And Warren Madrigal, since the Gold Cup, has started 2 of their 6 games, but not selected for the 4 others. So we have him as just a possible candidate. And I should say he's with Saprissa in Costa Rica. So again, a lot of inconsistency, which is difficult to wade through here. As I said, a few players who seem to be off the squad that we won't present. Phew, we've made it through the through section 2. It's a pretty grueling section, but I knew it would be with all the players going out and coming in and all the inconsistencies. Let's move on to section 3, and I'll begin with closing thoughts and just summarize that. So, on the surface level, it looks like, oh, the veterans are going out and the new players are coming in. It's actually a lot more complicated than that. We see players, young players who looked promising a year ago, not being selected since the Gold Cup. We see players who seem to be off the team being brought back into the team, having been off for 2 or 3 years and playing the March games. We just see all sorts of things for Costa Rica. So definitely kind of hard to predict, and a new manager on top of it. So that complicates things. And so obviously the new manager will have to kind of try to sort these things out. I think it'll be really over the next few years, hopefully in preparation for the 2026 World Cup qualifying. I don't think it'll all be sorted out in the Copa America here, but he does have a couple of World Cup qualifying games in June, as well as a friendly to start sorting it out, and the Copa America, which I think he'll use more as a way of sorting out his team for 2026 World Cup qualifying. Okay, let's go to the review of starters. I don't think we're going to get much here, but let's try it. I just have to switch off in order to prepare for that. All right, here we are then at the top of the list, and we will highlight Gustavo Alvaro as a definite for being a starter, as it were. So we're looking at starters here, or potential starters, and I don't think we're going to have too many. Let us go to the goalkeepers. And here it looks actually one of the clearer positions. It does look like Kevin Chamorro is the starter there. However, we're not confident enough. We think it's Chamorro now that Navas is not an option, but again, we're kind of expecting some changes in June, so we're not going to be very confident about any of our selections here. But for now, Kevin Chamorro looking the most likely there as a starter. On to central defenders. Calvo and Cascante seem fairly likely, but again, with all the changes, we can't be too sure. We think a three-man central defense is also likely, but the additional candidate or the additional player could be one of several candidates. We will highlight Calvo and Cascante as likely starters, though. And on we go to left back here. Really, let me see. I think we have no idea here who would be the starter. Not even a hint. We'll have to look at the June games to get anything. We only have the highest ranking candidate here is only at the possible level, and we don't think that player is likely to be a starter. However, over on the right back position, we do think Jeffrey Valverde is a likely starter. Not necessarily in this position. We saw that he played on the left as well, but looking the most likely among the candidates here. In central defense, in the central defensive / central midfielder, again, we are willing to highlight Alejandro Bran and Orlando Gallo as likely starters. They seem the most likely candidate. Gallo used in the last 3 games there, and Bran used the most. But again, we're not confident about it because we think we could see big changes up ahead. For left and right midfielders, no candidates there. They don't actually use the position that much, so we go right on up to attacking midfielders, and we will highlight Zamora as our most likely candidate. He really seems the only candidate at this point, but again, things could change. Right attackers, we will highlight Joel Campbell as the likely candidate to be the starter. But it is really still up in the air on this side too, so we don't have any great confidence in that. And central attacking midfield, they don't use the position enough for us to nominate a starter there. So we go right to forwards. I see actually we put the candidates in the wrong place here under secondary strikers, but we'll just forge on. We do think Ugalde here, actually one of our more confident predictions, almost definite on the evidence we have, starting all 6 of the last games. But again, the feeling is that the new manager will experiment more in the June friendlies and might not end up landing on Ugalde. We have three likely candidates alongside of him too. So they're not able to fully confidently nominate any starters for this one. Let's go over a review of injuries for this. And the only one we actually have is left midfielder Randall Leal. Even without the injury, we consider him just a possible candidate anyway, but a tendon tear from February to early April caused him to miss the March game. He came back and played briefly for his club and then was out with a hip injury and an unknown return date. So even, as I say, even without that injury, was just a possible candidate. And that's all we have to report at this time. So we'll move on to our last order of business, previewing part 2. So I think part 2 is going to be chaotic, just like part 1 was. Any notable non-selections or surprise notable non-selections? That would be the definite. I think we only had one definite candidate and maybe none. Likely candidates who are not selected, we will point out. Any surprise inclusions, that could be players brought back in from the cold. Maybe some veterans will be called back in, or new players. We will point out that in part 2, and then updates on injuries we'll be able to update as we get closer to the Cup. All of that after the final squads are released and we know who is going to make it, which is our order, our main order of business in part 2. All right, that brings us to the end. We would like to thank Paul Udin and Pixabay for the wonderful background music accompanying this mediacast. The piece is called Victory Epic Music.